What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the College Football Show here on the Post-Gazette Sports Now YouTube channel. Your college football beat writers Noah Hiles and Andrew Destin coming to you live from our respective cities of where we cover our teams. And Andrew, both of us had a late night Saturday night. One of us covered a win. The other is currently speaking. And we'll just start off the show there. I'll give you the floor to ask me anything you'd like to know about the 4-3 and 1-2 in ACC play Pittsburgh Panthers.
I guess I'll keep it kind of open. Like you said, no, I wasn't able to watch the game live, but of course I was able to check the ticker afterward and saw what the score was in Louisville. I've heard nothing but great things about the city. I'm sure that was a wonderful time for you.
Awesome city.
But the game itself seems like the offense kind of sputtered a little bit again. Am I understanding that, or what happened with the Panthers offense down there in Louisville?
Yeah, it's hard to blame a loss on someone in the game of football, but you can really pinpoint two of Pitt's three losses to quarterback play. And that's a tough thing to say, but it's really the truth that their offense actually was clicking in the first half. They were moving the football not only on the ground, but Keaton Slovis was making big plays through the air, especially on third down. There were multiple times he found Jared Wayne to continue possessions, continue moving the sticks, and he looked pretty good. And then he had two just horrible decisions, two interceptions inside his own 40 both times, or inside the opposing team's 40, I should say, while his team was on the march. Rather than throwing the ball away or taking a sack, and part of that might have been him not checking into the correct position, protection. But whatever happened, there were two horrible decisions that resulted in game-changing turnovers. And then you add in a third turnover with a fumble from Rodney Hammond Jr., who in his first game back, they're running the Wildcat. It's working. They march right down the field, him and Abanikanda looking electric. And then Hammond Jr. doesn't hold on to the ball. And that was another turnover. And then the fourth one was kind of when the game was pretty much out of reach already. Well, no, actually it wasn't. It was a 7-point game. But by the second half, they had no rhythm offensively, and it just really looked like they weren't able to score a touchdown, kind of how they were against Georgia Tech for most of that game. So that fourth turnover turned into a defensive score for Louisville, and that really sealed it. But even before that, like I honestly don't think if he doesn't fumble there, I still don't think Pitt wins that game, because the second half, I think they had 108 yards of total offense. And that you just can't do that, not with the talent that they have up front in the backfield with their one of the best running backs in the country. And, a guy who was once a pretty highly regarded quarterback. There's just too much going wrong right now for Pitt, and it doesn't get any easier this week.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right about Keaton. I mean, just you talk about how well he played when he was back at USC, and this is, as somebody who's obviously, observing the team from much greater of a distance than yourself, really comes as a surprise to me. And it seemed like the heir apparent, and I feel like I've said this so many times, but it felt like the guy who was going to slide in there and do what Kenny did last year, and it's kind of not been particularly close, at least from what I can tell.
He doesn't even need to do what Kenny did. That's the thing. Kenny was in a completely different offense, one, and two, Kenny didn't have an All-American at running back, which is what they have right now with Abanikanda, and with Hammond Jr., I'm not sure how healthy he is now. He left the Louisville game with another injury, apparently, but you don't need to be Superman. You just need to be able to make 3 or 4 big throws a game. He doesn't need to be Patrick Mahomes. He needs to be Eli Manning in this offense. And it's bad, Andrew. It really is. And I give props to Narduzzi and Frank Signetti, who we got to talk to today, and his teammates. They all seem to have confidence in this guy. Narduzzi told us Monday, he said, I'm playing the best quarterback on our roster, a guy who I think has the best shot to win us games. And if that's the truth, holy cow. Like, it just blows my mind that if you look, I wrote something this week, can't remember what day, his quarterback rating has dropped in each of his last 4 starts since he's come back from that concussion. I don't know if he's gun shy from the concussion. I don't know if his confidence just wavers away after 1 or 2 bad mistakes, or I don't know if maybe he's just trying to do too much. I'm not sure what it is, but it's just not clicking. And it's not clicking with the receivers. It's not clicking with him. And it's losing them games. His bad play is not only hurting their offense, it's hurting their defense, who's exhausted by the fourth quarter. And that's why if you look, teams who they hang around with, like Georgia Tech and Louisville in both those games, they start allowing touchdowns late in the fourth quarter. Why? It's because all the 3-and-outs and turnovers, they don't have any time to catch their breath and really regroup after getting all of their own 3-and-outs. So it's a tough situation right now for Pitt. Facing Drake May is not going to make anything easier. But, the answer on how this gets turned around is real simple. It comes down to number 9. And when you're facing a team like North Carolina, who can put up 45 points against anyone, essentially, you can't have a one-dimensional offense against that team, especially if that dimension is running the football. You're going to have to beat North Carolina in a shootout. And when I asked Pat Narduzzi that, I said, do you think your team's able to do that? He didn't really give me a straight answer because he knows the answer. The only way this team's going to beat North Carolina, if it continues to play the way it does, is if it controls the time of possession to an astronomically high amount. Like, what's that? The Bill Parcells Super Bowl over the Bills, where they won with the backup and the Scott Norwood miss. Like, that's what's going to happen if they want to win this game. But it's not good, Andrew. Something that is good, though, was the performance Penn State had in its whiteout win over Minnesota. Tell me more about that one.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind for me, and similar to you, wrote about this one, was the tight end play for Penn State. It was something that went away, did not exist at all in the Michigan game. Brenton Strange had one catch, I think, for 8 yards. And then you flash forward to the Minnesota game this past weekend, and the tight ends combined for over 100 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. And Sean Clifford, who came out to booze during the pregame warmups. They announced the players on the video board. The fans were not so receptive to Clifford, and a couple of 3-and-outs and an interception on the first 3 drives. Fans were not happy, but from that 4th drive onward, the offense just clicked. They seemed to get whatever they wanted, and it was almost like Penn State did to Minnesota what Michigan had done to Penn State just a week before. They totally regrouped. The score felt nearly the same, 45-17 versus 41-17. But the key to me on offense was just finding the tight ends early and often. All of them had catches. It's the first time you can say that since the Michigan game last year. That was really the key there. And then the defense itself, I mean, albeit they had some help. Minnesota's starting quarterback was out. Tanner Morgan did not play. So you got a backup in there for the Golden Gophers. That doesn't help when you're playing in a whiteout environment, and 5 false starts in the first half for Minnesota. So really, I mean, not to keep going with the white ball puns, but, it was a snowball effect, really what happened with 5 false starts, backup quarterback, tight ends getting involved. Everywhere you looked, it was all going in Penn State's favor. And it was a big win for them because a lot of people said before the season, okay, Penn State, if they win 1 out of these 3 games, that's okay. And if you can steal one of the other 2, then you're in great shape. Well, that opportunity still exists, and they took care of business in the game that everybody expected them to win, and that's the key.
Yeah, and we even said that on our show, where the one of these 3 to lose was the Michigan one, because we both think Ohio State will get revenge on Michigan this year. So if Ohio State loses to Penn State has the road ahead, essentially, to probably get to the Big Ten championship if it can win out and Ohio State can win out moving forward. But let's talk about this game, Andrew. James Franklin's been around for a while now. He's coached in some big games. He's, won a Big Ten title, went to the Rose Bowl. It's hard to argue that this isn't one of the biggest games of his career here. Is it the biggest? And if not, what was and why?
It's really close. It's really close to being one of the biggest. And the one I'll point to, and I know we were talking about this a little bit prior, would be go back to 2017. That's the year after you mentioned the Rose Bowl and the Big Ten championship, right?
Yeah.
Penn State gets 11 wins, finishes the top 10 team in the country in 2016. And then they go into 2017 and play against a familiar opponent, one that's coming up this weekend in Ohio State. And that was one when Penn State was number 2 in the country. They went into Columbus to face an Ohio State team that was number 6 in the country. And that one was a huge one because Penn State had all the momentum in the world. Saquon Barkley was in his junior year, had Trace McSorley, all these big names. And they went up big in that game and then sputtered and blew the lead in the 4th quarter, which sounds familiar to Penn State fans, I'm sure. But losing that game by 1 point, that was a heartbreaker and certainly a huge one for Penn State to lose that one. I'll still call that James Franklin's biggest game, but it's no surprise. It feels like every year that every time Penn State plays Ohio State, it's the biggest game of the year or one of the biggest games of the James Franklin tenure. So this one's up there for sure. And especially considering this is kind of a different position, I might argue. It's not like 2016 when Penn State played Ohio State, because back then Penn State was 5-2. They had lost to Pitt and Michigan. But there's something to be said that Penn State is coming off a big win. The expectations are kind of low. They're double-digit underdogs at home. they're kind of playing in a position where they've got nothing to lose. I mean, you're a 2-touchdown underdog. You're playing at home against a really good Ohio State team that personally I think might be the best team in the country just based off what CJ Stroud's doing at quarterback and how they fix their offense. So this is a huge game for sure for Penn State. The question is if they can slow down that Ohio State offense. That's an entirely different conversation. But
all right, so real quick, give me 3 quick keys of the game here.
Yeah, I think the first one, I mean, you got to start with CJ Stroud is how can you generate pressure against him? I mean, so often this year he's been able to have all day to throw. And you talk about the receiving options that he has in Igbuka, in Marvin Harrison Jr., now Jackson Smith and Jigba is healthy, and he's got a couple of great running backs in Travion Henderson and Mayan Williams. It's a talented, talented roster. But CJ Stroud hasn't really gotten much pressure in his face this year. So, it's a time-honored tradition in college football, right? Get after the quarterback, cause problems. But C.J. Stroud has been upright all season long and hasn't faced any adversity. The toughest teams he's faced are a Notre Dame team that's proven to not be so good and an Iowa team last week that is incapable of moving the offense in any capacity.
Yeah.
So I think first thing is you got to find a way to slow down an Ohio State's offense, and I think that has to start with slowing down Stroud. The second thing is play turnover-free football. Now, Penn State did a pretty good job of that against Michigan, but that's because they weren't aggressive. Now you got to take the next step. You have to be able to take care of the football, but actually be able to move the ball. And I'm really curious how good this Ohio State defense is. Everybody's talking about Jim Knowles, the defensive coordinator for Ohio State, who was hired. He was brought in from Oklahoma State, and people are talking about how great the Buckeyes defense is right now. And it's been great. They're second in the country in total yards given up. They've been excellent. But, like I mentioned, they haven't faced great offenses yet. Now, I'm not going to come out here and say that Penn State's offense is a world beater by any stretch, but how good is Ohio State's defense? Can they generate those turnovers, or is Penn State able to move the ball a little bit? That's a huge key for me is can you take care of the ball against a defense that has shown that it hasn't faced anybody that's substantially tough? So that's a big one for me there. And another one I will point to is the special teams battle, and this kind of goes towards taking care of the football, but people have mentioned that all week during practice. James Franklin's brought it up, is that the punting of Ohio State is among the best in the country. And not just in terms of yardage, not in terms of just inside the 20. We all know how good that Barney Amore is at punter for Penn State. But what Ohio State does with different types of punting, knuckleballs, things that in a game that could prove to be a little bit lower scoring than people might think, Ohio State's offense is great. But that secondary for Penn State has shown over the year that that's one of the strengths of the defense. So, I tend to think Penn State probably matches up a little bit better against Ohio State than they did against Michigan per se, which much more wanted to run the ball down Penn State's throats. And Ohio State wants to spread the ball out to all its different options because they have those athletes. But if the defense can keep this a lower scoring game, then special teams is going to be huge because Penn State last week against Minnesota, if there's anything they didn't do great, it's that they on the receiving game, they had one muffed punt that they recovered. They had a second one where the punt returner, Parker Washington, caught the ball over behind his head, which I've never seen that before.
Yeah, that's wild.
Backpedaling and catching it behind him. But if those type of mistakes resurface against Ohio State and not Minnesota, that could be the deciding factor, that it wouldn't even matter how Penn State's offense plays or how the defense gets into C.J. Stroud's face. If you don't shore up the punt return and the kickoff return, where they've been rotating some guys on kickoff return as well, that could be an issue too. So it's all three phases, really. Penn State kind of has to play a perfect game to get a win in this one, but it's not impossible, as we've seen in the past, if you go back to 2016. But it hasn't been recently that Penn State's beaten Ohio State, because got to go back to 2016 for that.
All right. So on that note, Penn State, Ohio State contains one team at least that will probably be in the college football playoff rankings, regardless of win or lose, this upcoming weekend. November 1st is when those come out. So that would be what, Tuesday?
Yes, Tuesday.
All right, yeah. So Tuesday evening is when those rankings come out. Don't expect Pitt to be in the top 25, but I think Penn State will be somewhere, as will Ohio State. But let's go through right now, Andrew. And I'm not saying as of this moment. I'm saying based upon what you expect to happen this weekend, and just going through the top 8 ranked matchups, we have Georgia playing Florida, Ohio State, Penn State, Tennessee, Kentucky, Michigan, Michigan State, Clemson, and Alabama, 5 and 6 are both on byes. TCU, number 7, is at West Virginia, and number 8, Oregon, is at Cal U. So based on what you think is going to happen in those games, give me your top 4 college football playoff teams.
Well, I think all the teams that are going to be in action that you mentioned right there, pretty much all expecting victories on that end. So I'm going to go with this in mind of rewarding teams for their best wins. So for me, it's no question I got to go with Tennessee at number one. The victory that they have over Alabama. I know it was tight. I know everything had to go their way. It did. It's unquestionable. Beating Alabama, that's a huge win. Got to put Tennessee number one. I went back and forth on this one. I went between Ohio State and Georgia. I really want to reward Georgia for that huge win over Oregon, which every week continues to look better and better.
Yeah.
49-3 against an Oregon team that just kind of took care of business against UCLA. I really want to put Georgia 2. But to me, I have to put Ohio State 2, Georgia 3, and then Michigan 4. Ohio State, to me, ever since that Notre Dame game, I know the strength of schedule hasn't been great, but they've won each of their last 5 games by at least 29 points. I mean, it hasn't been close the way it was last week against Iowa. I got to go Ohio State 2, Georgia 3, and then Michigan at number 4. So Big Ten SEC bias, probably a little bit, but 2 Big Ten, 2 SEC schools. That's my top 4. What do you got, Noah?
I got something a little different. One, I actually have – I think Kentucky beats Tennessee this weekend. So going off of that, I'll start off with my 2 teams out. I have Tennessee as the first team out and Alabama as the second team out. So Tennessee at number 5 and Alabama at number 6. We'll go through the top 4 now. I have Georgia in the 1 spot. Like you said, that Oregon win was incredibly impressive. And sure, there have been other games where they haven't really looked like the Georgia of last year or even of early this year, but still, I just think that this is the most talented team in the country, and when it wants to turn it on, we're going to see that, and I think we'll see that Saturday in a rivalry game against Florida. Number 2, I'm going to go with Michigan because weighing out their schedules, has Michigan dominated to the likes of Ohio State? No, but both of their top wins between those 2 programs will be over the same team, and I think Penn State will play Ohio State a lot tougher than it did Michigan. So I think Michigan gets the nod at 2. Ohio State coming in at number 3. And then Clemson, I have rounding out the top 4, just to get another conference involved in there. Sure. Not that I care if the ACC does well or not, but, just be a little different here. I don't think that's how it ends. I do think that Tennessee will eventually work its way back in, but it's just hard to imagine Tennessee continuing this. Like like I said, we said this earlier. If Tennessee's able to continue this run, it's similar to the Joe Burrow 2019 LSU Tigers, which very well could be the case. But holy cow! I mean, I'm going to need to see it before I can, just even imagine that happening again. So, Andrew, there's another show. Any final thoughts?
Not a whiteout, and I've learned from you, Noah, after covering one last weekend. You may be onto something about these night games being the death kiss to sports writers, so I will gladly enjoy the noon one. I learned my lesson on that one this past Saturday, so looking forward to a noon kick, even if fans aren't.
I'm an idiot and booked a 6 a.m. flight home from North Carolina, thinking that game would not be scheduled at 8 p.m. It is. I might be pulling an all-nighter, but I'm not going to complain. Not going to complain. If you want to complain, you can reach out to us on social media, or you could tell us that we're doing a good job. Regardless, doesn't matter either one. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and stick around because we'll have more content coming for you next week. We'll see you then.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you liked the video, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you enjoyed it on Apple Podcasts, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down in the description.